It's here. We are redefining what it means to sit at the girls' table. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Girls Table, a podcast where women founders, creators, and investors share their stories. Today, I'm joined by Julia Landauer, who is an American professional NASCAR race car driver and motivational keynote speaker. During college, Julia was actually also a contestant on season 26 of CBS's reality TV show Survivor. Julia, I'm so excited to jump into how you built a brand around yourself at such a young age to get sponsors for race car driving, how you have become an advocate for women, and your story of how you got to where you are today. So thanks so much for coming on The Girls Table. I just want to add that it probably won't be as exciting as being behind a race car, but I'm so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I've seen some of your other guests, and it's just such a cool thing that you're doing. So thank you for amplifying our stories. And although a different kind of adrenaline, it's still, it's still fun. It's still fun.
I just want to start off. I was recently listening to you on a TEDx talk, and you talked about and really painted this picture of what it's like to be behind a race car. And so I was wondering if you could start it off and really just allow us to picture what it's like, because I think most of us, although we've hit a soccer ball, done some baseball, most of us haven't gone over 150 miles per hour behind a car.
Exactly. And it's not quite like driving on the road, right? Even though you shouldn't, if you do go that fast on the road, it's still very different. So the way I like to describe it is just, imagine you're strapped tightly into this 3,400-pound machine. You have this huge steel and foam seat around you. You're full throttle, feeling the vibrations. It's super hot in the car because the motor's right there. It can be 155 degrees in the car, but you're full throttle, vibrations. You're hearing the engine roar. You're going into the corners, and you have to brake, and you feel the G-forces as you turn in, and you're listening to your spotter and your crew chief and taking in that information, and you're burning off the rubber on the tires throughout a run, and you're burning off fuel, so the weight distribution's changing, and then, you're trying to pass the people in front of you, and then keep the people behind you, and not hit the people on the side of you, not hit the wall, and actively then try to go win the race for hours and hours and hours on end. There's so much going on, and there's so many inputs that we have to process. And then there's also, you're just in this zone, so it kind of just happens. It's the most incredible feeling that I've, experienced.
It must be the biggest adrenaline rush, but probably also seems like one of the scariest sports to do.
It is scary. It's definitely scary. It's really, I'm the kind of driver that, I don't just go in full throttle right off the bat. I build up to it. I'm pretty pragmatic, and there are certain times where you just have to accept that even though maybe going full throttle intellectually seems like it's too dangerous, it actually the car handles better based on the aerodynamics and the mechanical grip. It can actually be safer and feel better when you're going faster. And getting within, inches of a wall is definitely scary. But I think once you have your first crash, which we all crash, you know that you can walk away, and that it's going to be okay. And it's expensive, and there are some minor injuries, but NASCAR is super, super safe. There hasn't been a death in NASCAR since 2001 with Dale Earnhardt Sr. So just the safety improvements have been so incredible, and they're the whole tech STEM side of that is super interesting to me, from the barriers on the wall, how they're constructed, to kind of how the car is built to crash, so it absorbs the kinetic energy so the driver doesn't. So there's a bunch of little things that go into it that make it quite a bit safer. So knowing that is definitely reassuring.
I'm actually shocked. I thought there would have been a death way sooner. So that's definitely good to hear that it's been, I guess, over 20 years before death has happened.
Yeah.
How did you first get into race car driving? This is just not a sport that you pick up a ball and you're like, all right, let's go play. This seems very specific. So how did you first get into it?
Yeah, so my parents got me and my siblings into go-karting when I was 10. And I think, I know that my dad wanted to race when he was little and wasn't allowed to. And in addition to just kind of that, maybe vicariously living through us, they really loved that it was something we could all do together, that they could help us with in a very hands-on way. And they also really liked that it was co-ed. And so their daughters could be competitive against boys, with the thinking being men and women interact in the real world and in competitive environments. And so why not help get their daughters used to that, I guess. And so I loved it. I loved going fast. I loved winning once I started winning, and liked working with adults. And I liked that I was this little kid that was maneuvering a machine. Like that human machine interaction was really cool. So kind of got hooked pretty quickly, and we just figured out how to keep climbing the levels of racing, and eventually we're pursuing the minor leagues of NASCAR. Everything post-college has been pursuing the minor leagues of NASCAR.
Wow. And do men and women always compete against each other, or are there men-specific races and women-specific races?
Well, there are races where there are only men, but they're not exclusive. Like, women are allowed to compete. There's one series that's kind of an international series in more the Formula One style, like that open wheel kind of car. That's a women's series, but otherwise it's completely co-ed. And I think that's really cool. And there are obstacles and there are pluses and minuses. But when it comes down to sheer ability to drive a race car and race against other cars really well, there really is no biological inhibitor, right? It's not brute strength. It's not like how far can you throw a ball. It's a mix of endurance and some upper body strength for sure. We need strong neck muscles. We need good upper body core strength. We need to be able to deal with extreme heat and that kind of endurance, and the mental endurance if you are 100% focused. For me at my level, it's like 2.5 hour races. So there's no pause. You don't get to, kick the ball to someone else. It's like you are go 100%.
Yeah, and you're going like 174 miles per hour. Right then, you're going against concrete walls. Then you're slowing down to go 20 miles per hour. And you talked a little bit about needing that endurance, but what are some of the other skills, or maybe some of the best skills that you've seen the most successful race car drivers have? Yeah,
so there are a handful of things that I think are really important to train and to work on. So one would be kind of your visual, peripheral vision, how quickly you're able to take on inputs, like your depth perception. So I work with a trainer it's from PitFit is the name of the company, and we work on motorsport specific stuff. So we, we'll be doing something like do some kind of strength workout, and then there'll be an app where we have to kind of look at the app or the screen and point out numbers in ascending order while also screaming out or saying out colors that are popping up on a phone that's right in the peripheral vision. So like that kind of staying focused, being able to expand what we see. Because like if we're driving and there's a car coming up on the inside or something's happening, we want to be able to see as much as we can. So that's one thing. I think there's something about being able to be really consistent in how you're able to put the car in certain places. Like, we measure our times to the hundredths of a second, right? And so on a 30-second lap, if you can have all of your laps be within a couple tenths of a second, you're going to be that much more consistent. You're going to be that much more likely to pass people. And it helps the engineers being able to kind of know if their changes made a difference on the car or what that change was. And then there's stuff like neck strength. And then there's stuff like, do you have that X factor to see a gap between two cars and try to go for it, right? Like that like racer's instinct. Are you aggressive enough, but also smart? Are you making calculated decisions, but they're also impressive enough? There's like that kind of stuff that I don't think you can measure. It's like people are either really good at it or they're not. And every driver has different styles.
And is there anything you do before a race to really help get out the nerves and get you in the right mindset before really getting into that car?
Yeah, so I don't really listen to music, but I do listen to Taylor Swift's song I Know Places from her 1989 album, because I'm a little superstitious, but I listened to that in 2015 when I won my second championship, and it's just like, okay, I have to listen to this as my pump up. But then I definitely feel the nerves, and when I feel nerves, like I feel a little jittery, I feel like my mind kind of is bouncing around, and that's not the best way to get into a race car. And so I try to do a little like sprint. It's not really a sprint because the suit's kind of tight, so I can't go all out, but like run down pit lane and back, or like run to the bathroom and back, but just something to get that negative energy out or that nervous energy out and just feel excited. Endorphins make you happy, right?
I actually used to fence, and I used to do that same thing because I used to get so nervous, and I'd run down a hallway. It was like filled with people. There's not too many places to go. I'd run down, run back, just like try to calm myself. And how has that mindset really translated to your everyday life when you get scared for something, whether that's a speaking gig, doing your TEDx talk, or just anything, because we all get scared at times?
We definitely all get scared. And I think like not just the big stuff, but like, if I'm pitching someone for sponsorship, or if I'm proposing an idea, or like anything that's like high stakes, or there's, I could be nervous, I could be scared if someone's at all intimidating. And I kind of have a mantra of just thinking, why not? Like I know it seems super simple, but I really try to break it down as pragmatically and rationally as I can and be like, okay, I'm nervous about this. I'm uncomfortable, but why not do it? Is there some greater thing that I should think about to prevent me from doing it? Or am I just uncomfortable and need to push past that discomfort? So I'm naturally that kind of a pragmatic person, so it works for me. And if I can't give myself a good enough reason not to do something besides being uncomfortable, then I have to do it, and I have to like swallow the fear, just deal with the discomfort. And then you do that enough times and you realize, no matter how scared, uncomfortable I am, once I've proven that I can do it, like I know that I will do it. It's like when you have your first breakup, you don't know how you're going to recover from it, but then you do recover and you realize in the future, it's like, okay, worst case, we'll go through this again and we'll recover and it'll be okay.
Yeah. And you also actively talk about using your mind so it doesn't get in the way. So like one thing I think you mentioned is that you really like the night before, we'll just picture you winning the race. You're like, I get into the car, I drive the car, I'm winning, whatever the case may be. And sometimes I'm personally very scared to visualize success because then if it doesn't happen, then I let myself down. So like, I'll give you a very broad, apart from like doing fencing, I have really want to get Forbes 30 under 30. Sounds stupid. People will have their marks for why it's not a big deal. It's something that I personally want. But I keep telling myself, I'm like, I'm probably not going to get it. I'm not going to get it. And I'm giving myself all the reasons that I'm not going to get it because I'm too scared to get my hopes up. So do you ever feel this way when you're visualizing winning a race?
This is such a good question that I have never been asked before, but I think it's so important. It's something I thought about a lot because I have learned that my nature and where I enjoy living is on that emotional roller coaster. I love getting my hopes up. I love feeling like there's all the potential in the world because that fills me with this excitement and this motivation and enthusiasm to like really give it my all. And that means that more often than not, I have to deal with if I don't get it or if it doesn't work. And for the most part, I feel alive by that. And I had a boyfriend in college where he made that comment that he doesn't want to get his hopes up. And it was something that just like I hadn't thought about before because it's pretty foreign to how my mind works and my brain works. And I think I've been dealing with rejection for so long. Like I made my first sponsorship pitch when I was 16. It was not ever going to work in hindsight, but like I got used to people telling me no and like you move on and you keep going. And so the prospect of the yes is enough to drive me. And I also really believe, and I've learned that like, and I have to actively walk myself through this, but like so many other people will tell us no, right? So many other people will not give us the opportunity or tell us we don't deserve it. So I don't want to be my own worst enemy. I don't want to get in my own way. And if it would be such a shame to like not give it my 100%, and then, not get it when I might have. So to answer your question, I think that for me personally, embracing those high hopes and dealing with the lows is okay. And again, the more you do it, the easier it gets. But it can be there was one time this fall where we had been pitching a company and it looked like it was so promising. Like it wasn't too good to be true, but there were a lot of things that had to fit together and it was looking like it was going to go and it would be massive. And then it didn't happen. And that was the first time in a while where I was like, oh my God, this emotional roller coaster was exhausting and super disappointing. And if it doesn't work out, I try to analyze if there's anything I could have done differently. And I ask, I ask people for kind of feedback. They might not always give it, but I ask. And then if I've done what I could, we just pick up and we move to the next thing. But I think maintaining enthusiasm, I think, is super important. You'll bring your most to the table if you're most enthusiastic, and other people will be more inclined to kind of join you if they see that enthusiasm. So for me, that's really important, even if it's disappointing sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that goes like hand in hand with being vulnerable because I think I'll go back to like my fencing example. Like people are rated A, the best, B, C, D. And if I was going against somebody that was rated some of the best, I would walk in there and be like, I'm not good enough. And it also has to do with self-talk, like, oh, they're better. I'm not good enough. I'm not going to win. Where it's like, hey, switch the mindset. Visualize you're going to win. You've been practicing. You are good. You're better. And I would psych myself out so much that when I got there, I would not perform as well that I know I could, as well that my coaches know that I could, because I had this terrible self-talk and this desire to not be vulnerable. I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to like let myself get the expectation I'm going to win because then I'm going to let myself down. So instead, let's just set expectations. I'm going to lose. And more likely than not, then I'm going to lose. And so I love your mindset where I think I need to work on that more. And I think a lot of people do, but I'll just talk for myself where it's like visualize success and like let yourself be vulnerable, let yourself lose, but like at least give it your all, because if you're just picturing not succeeding, then you're not going to give it your all.
And I've heard like a lot of people talk about ego, and when we do things for ego, that's when we're likely to be insecure and everything. And I think that definitely plays into it. I know that my ego is involved, and I work on that. But I think part of it is also being focusing on hitting your marks and focusing on where you are in the moment. So for example, like I know that I'm a champion race car driver. I know I'm super talented, but I also know, I haven't had a lot of seat time over the last couple of years. And so when I now jump into the NASCAR Xfinity Series, which is the second level from the top of NASCAR, these people are racing every week, so much experience in this car, and I'm jumping in for the first time, ever. And we had so little practice. We had so little, testing beforehand. And so realistically, my expectation and my hope was just to finish the race. And as a competitor, that's a weird position to be in. With all these people watching, you only get that one chance to make your debut. But the reality is that I had to be realistic about what my expectations were. And obviously, if you've established yourself as an expert in any industry or a top-level athlete, like the pressure rises. But being okay, just focusing on hitting your marks as opposed to the big picture, I think is really helpful. And then my second point to your vulnerability comment, I had a pretty rough elementary school and middle school. I was in a private school in New York, all full of mean girls. Like it was rough. And then I switched to a public school for math and science, so lots of nerds. It took all 4 years of high school to start to get comfortable and open up after I had felt so compelled to shut down because I was so uncomfortable socially. And so I realized that, the more that I shared little personal anecdotes, the more that I shared enthusiasm, frustrations, all of that, it was a lot more relatable with people. And I was able to finally like make more friends. And it was this kind of like switch moment where like, suddenly I'm more engaging with people. And that vulnerability, and whether you look at it as vulnerability or just being more personal around people or not worrying about judgment, which is obviously way easier said than done. I think that's where people get really excited about who you are, regardless of what your background is, regardless of what your accomplishments are. People want to relate to other people.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll add to that is lately I've been adding in affirmations in my life. So whether that's like, I am smart, I am enough, I am beautiful, like whatever it is, just to get that confidence level back in ourselves. Because I think whether it's social media or whether it's just a voice in our head, there's so many things that we're comparing ourselves to where it's like, if you truly believe you are enough, then I think you're destined for success and you could do anything that you set your mind to. But if you're always telling yourself like, I'm not going to win, I'm not enough, they're better, they're this, you are not going to reach your full potential. And so totally. I think we all need to work on that. But I loved your saying about really just visualizing success, because if you don't believe it's going to happen, then 99.9% of the time, it's not going to happen.
100%. And yeah, positive self-talk. I will admit that I thought that was kind of fluffy when I first heard the term. And then I realized like I was engaging in a lot of negative and just belittling self-talk. Like I think being self-critical is super important. Like you got to call yourself when you have room for improvement or could do something better. But just negative, like bashing yourself, it's toxic, and we're in our brains 24/7. So if we're hearing that same message and that same tone with ourselves over and over and over again, like it's going to impact us.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of something else that you talk about is really getting a sponsor. And so I want to start off with, do you think there are similarities between trying to make it in racing to trying to make it in business?
Let me tell you, racing is like 90% business, 10% sport. It's kind of frustrating. I kind of wish it was a little different, but it's the sport that I love. But yeah, it's super expensive. You think about tires, gas, people that have to work on the teams, travel, crash damage, all this stuff. And the top, NASCAR Cup teams spend, tens of millions of dollars a year. At the Xfinity level, it's still many millions a year for the very best teams. And as a driver, you have to essentially bring your own funding, whether it's personal funding or sponsor funding. Drivers, through kind of a lot of these like 3 national series have to bring their own funding. And so you do have to market yourself. You have to be valuable. But what we find is that sometimes the driver by themselves can only offer so much ROI when the team owns the assets and the team owns the car, all that stuff. So we've had to be super, super creative. It has been a very frustrating road. And the last few years were slower because I couldn't get enough of the funding that I needed. So like I actually kind of thought I was going to be ending my racing career in 2021 just because I was struggling so much and nothing was working. And that was when in my free time, I jumped into Web3 and started, learning about NFTs because I didn't know what they were. And I felt like a dum-dum, just, I wanted to learn about them and started collecting, started creating. And I realized like the whole community aspect was so exciting. And so I spent like 8 or 9, 10 months just like getting involved in communities. And it was through there that I found one that was racing focused. They wanted to sponsor a driver. I got that sense. And so I pitched them. I just decided to shoot my shot and they said yes. And I was like, oh my God, here we are. Let's go. That was Garage XYZ. And then I had to get kind of the second, a little more than half of the funding remaining. And, that's where Boss Beauty stepped up and they were the first groups to sponsor me. So it was just so cool that this like new technology on the blockchain that was creating these new communities was the industry that stepped up to support me. And it was just really cool to bring that IRL utility to the communities. It was really exciting that they were the first NFT communities to sponsor a NASCAR driver ever. And so that was really exciting. And I was just so happily pleased that I was able to marry all these worlds. And it was kind of, I think a lot of these really cool business ideas come up in random places. And so, yes, long answer to your question, I truly believe that racing is like a business and you just never know where that spark of idea is going to come. And you just like so much is timing and a little bit of luck of, the right people at the right time with the right needs. So yeah, it's been cool. It's been cool to navigate the space, and brand building is really frustrating to me. I think it's so hard. I think it's really hard as women on social media also, but especially female athletes. I feel like we're in a rough spot to like be feminine, be classic in like how people look at social media, but then also be super strong and, so focused on the sport. I think this is something that I've heard a lot of female athletes talk about. So total tangent and switch gears on your question, but yeah. It's all business.
And it's so funny. You probably don't remember this, but we had a call probably a little over a year now. And you had told me on the call,
I remember.
You think you're done with racing. And I'm like, it's so amazing to see you kind of go back up and the effect that Web3 had and just being able to find sponsors. And I just want to go back to the sponsors for a second. Like, is it aggravating being a race car driver knowing that the person next to you might win only because they were able to sell themselves better and had a better car or better sponsor, so they were able to go faster and get a better tire? Like, this seems like an aggravating sport because it's like a lot of it has to do with money.
Yeah, and I've definitely gotten really frustrated. And I think actually when we talked, I was probably at my like most bitter, most frustrated. And like one example is that there is a guy who is competing for the championship in this Xfinity series this year. And probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we were racing in the same series, and I had the funding I needed. And he finished third in points, I finished fourth, and he now like has been able to race consistently and comes from a wealthy family and gets sponsors and stuff. And so it's like, is that difference? It's like, oh, well, I could be that good. I could be fighting for a championship if we had been like on the same trajectory. So yes, it's frustrating. And I think this is where like I'm truly internalizing what adults always said, that life isn't fair. I feel like this is just having to deal with that. But as soon as I was able to just kind of, again, focus on my lane and realizing what my reality was and working and absolutely maximizing that the best that I could, I got a lot happier when I was able to just not be, comparison's the thief of joy. It's a little more complicated than that, but the more that I was able to just try to optimize what I could do, the more satisfied I got.
Yeah. And do you ever remember pitching? You mentioned your first time pitching, but was there any that stuck out to you? Was there something that you needed to do to really help build your brand, get the sponsor, and sell yourself?
Yeah. So I think, I'm still learning, and it's interesting because I think every company has different needs when it comes to when they're sponsoring. So maybe it's just pure eyeballs. Maybe it's, and that just took me getting enough racing to be able to be in a high enough series. Like the Xfinity series has about 1 million people view it per race. But I couldn't be there 6 years ago because I had to just build up to it, skill wise. So some stuff like that. And then, what I found is that it's been like a really slow and steady, small things. There hasn't been one breakthrough, but I'm finding that my consistently speaking about STEM education and women's empowerment and the overlap of women in STEM and staying authentic to that and being really real about it and not just like posting on International Women's Day or something like that. I feel that consistency over the years has meant that like now, a brand came to us and was like, we'd like to do some creator stuff with you because of your, ongoing passion for women and girls in STEM. And I was like, yes, amazing. Like I planted those seeds a long time ago, now many years later, like I wanted to help girls, be inspired to pursue STEM fields like since high school. So it's just like understanding that seeds you plant take some time to grow, but it's all a cumulative effect. That's been really satisfying to see it finally work a little bit. It's taken a long time.
Yeah, it's amazing to see you finally back out there really being a race car driver again.
So cool.
And I'm so happy for you. So what are the 3 greatest things you learned as a race car driver?
So one of the really, really, really important things that I had to learn that I'm still working on is clear and concise communication, and whether that's like physically on the radio, on the track when it's loud and we have to make split-second decisions, being clear and concise, but also like in just my relationship with my team, being the only woman on the team a lot, like making no assumptions, trying to have educational opportunities, especially if they're like people that are kind of buying into stereotypes, just trying to help. We're all a family. We're trying to make it great. So that clear, concise communication has been really important. I've mentioned this earlier, but like hitting your marks, I think that very physically on the track, I do that. I hold the gas as long as I have to. I focus on when I'm braking, when I'm turning in, when I'm getting off the pedals and just letting the car roll, like those specific marks. But that also applies to life. Like if you have a big goal you're trying to get to, or if you're trying to get on the Forbes 30 under 30 list, right? Like what steps do you have to take? What marks do you have to hit? Because the big picture can sometimes be overwhelming. And so, or trying to get a fast lap can be overwhelming, but break it down into those steps you have to take. That would be a second one. And I would say a third thing is to remember why you're doing what you're doing. There's so many headaches, so many frustrations, and sometimes, especially if you're in a lull, if you're needing to like really dig deep for perseverance, like remembering why you got started in the first place, why you're doing, even if like you're not like absolutely passionate about what you're doing, if it's like a way to get to something that you want, or if it's a way to build or a way to learn, like remember why you're doing it. And that's been helpful in the ups and downs of my racing career.
I love that third one, because I think sometimes we all just get really run down, and it's like taking a step back and being like, wait, why did I like this to begin with? Like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm burnt out. I'm this. I'm like depressed, whatever. It's like, wait, why are you doing what you're doing? And if you also don't like what you're doing, then change it. But really ask yourself internally what you like.
Totally.
And we talked a lot about predominantly being in this male-dominated sport. So was there any moment you remember where individuals specifically like looked at you or treated you differently because you were a woman?
I've had several different coaches tell me that they see that racers that they've been watching for years will, not everyone, but there are guys who will race you harder because you're a woman, because they don't want to get beat by you. So it's like things like they might block a little more aggressively, or if you're in front of them and they can't pass you, like bump you out of the way a little bit more. A couple coaches have said that. And I just, to me, I'm like, well, this is unfortunate, but also it means every pass I make is that much more impressive. Cool. Kind of flip that script, And
I love that.
yeah, so that's kind of tough because there's not much you can do about that besides just hold your own. And, kind of on the track, it's kind of like an eye for an eye. If you're someone who keeps, crashing people, like they'll crash you back. So you got to be strategic there, and it's a long season. So there's been that. I mean, I think there are some fans on social media that kind of buy into the women can't drive thing, but this kind of also goes back to the sponsorship side because, there are different level teams. They're the best teams that have the best equipment and the best people. They're the most expensive. And then it trickles down and you can pay less and less and less. And a lot of people, both men and women, agree that women tend to have a harder time getting sponsorship because there are so few examples of women who have won. Whatever funding we do get, we might have to just deal with being on lesser teams, which is nothing against the lesser teams. Like, everyone knows where they're operating. Everyone's realistic about what their potential to win is. But if you can only afford to be on those mid to lower tier teams, then you're not going to get those good results. And then you're going to have this cycle of just not being able to really show. So it's a little frustrating. I'm hoping to break that cycle a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. There are pros and cons, but I feel like overall I've had a decent journey as a woman in a male-dominated space. And part of that's protecting myself. I really try not to listen to like chatter. I work really hard on making sure I feel comfortable with the team that I'm running with, and if I have to work with them and I don't feel super comfortable, I do a lot of work to try to make it a better environment. And then I stay home a lot. I love being at home and not like dealing with drama.
Yeah. And if you could do any career, would you be a race car driver? Or would you do something else?
100% race car driver. But I don't think career needs to be one-dimensional. Like, I love that I can do keynote speaking like once or twice a month and inspire people and make them laugh and tell stories. I love that I can go racing. I love that I can work in Web3 and like I'm helping to onboard more motorsports related entities into Web3 because I think there's kind of a gap there and I see potential. So just being able to help, and I'm starting to realize there are only so many hours in a day, but I really love kind of this time that we're in, that we can really kind of go after a number of different things at one time.
And there are never enough hours in the day, might I add.
But especially because I need to sleep like 8 to 9 hours. Like, this is just my reality. I don't break that, especially with training. Like, I need proper recovery, but also I just like to sleep. I feel a lot better and I'm a lot happier when I'm sleeping.
Oh, so I'm the same. I need my 8 hours. If I don't have 8 hours, like the next day I have a headache. I can't work. No matter how much coffee I have, which I'm such an avid coffee drinker, like I think you have to know your body and be like, I need 8 hours. I wish I didn't, but I can't survive without 8 hours of sleep.
I'd rather have 8 hours at night than feel like I have to take a nap at 3 o'clock. You know, like that interrupts the day, but just sleeping a little more either at the end night or in the morning, it's good.
Yeah. We haven't talked about this at all, but I just want to ask, what was it like being on Survivor?
Man, it was really hard. It's super authentic. It wouldn't be on season 40, whatever, if it wasn't real. I mean, it was extremely challenging, but it was super cool. The challenges were a lot of fun. The people were weird. It was hard, but it was great. I'm so glad I got to do it. I don't know that they would have me back, but it would be cool to try to do it with like an even playing field. CBS,
if you're listening, make it more even for Julia and all the rest of the players.
Like, I know they think it's... Sorry, go for it.
I was going to say, what was your hardest moment when you were out there? Do you remember like a specific day, or I guess when... I honestly haven't watched a lot of the show, so I'd love if you could paint the picture of your hardest challenge there.
Yeah, so I would say there were two things that were the hardest. In general, I was 20 years old, and it was the first time that I like couldn't trust anybody that I was with. And so it was kind of weird to like have these kind of like almost like mom and dad figures that were playing, that were kind of there emotionally. Like, I got a really, really bad sunburn on my face that was like pus-filled, liquid-filled. Like, I could see it. Like, the bump was it was awful. And like, they felt bad for me. It's like, oh, these are my like, sub-in parents. And then realized, oh no, they're going to backstab me. Like, it was so weird to not be able to trust people. And then I think day 7 of not really eating a whole lot, I felt very, very weak. And then my body adjusted. I made it spoiler alert. I made it 19 days out of the 39.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it was really like day 7, 8-ish was very painful. And then I think my stomach shrunk and I was just better.
Okay. Going back to your life, who inspires you the most?
This is such a good question because there's so many inspiring people. I would say my heroes and heroes that I've always had, big Amelia Earhart fan, her just going after it. That's a level of chutzpah that I just really admire. I've always admired Paul Newman, kind of to what we're talking about, like being able to do so many different things in life. Actor, race car driver, philanthropist, business person. So just doing a lot there and kept doing it until like he kept driving in his 80s, which is kind of cool. And then, I don't know, there are the classics like Serena, big fan, Michael Schumacher in Formula One. There's just so many people. And what I really like to do is kind of, if there are people that are cool, inspiring, I kind of pick like, oh, what are they doing that I'm attracted to? And then I try to replicate it. I think there's nothing wrong with trying to live the way you see is really cool in other people.
Yeah, I actually had a video call with Serena Williams the other day, like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, because she's getting a venture now, and I freaked out. And like usually I like on calls I explain who I am. I'm Alana. I work at Red Bear. Here's my background. At the call, I'm just like, "Hi, I'm Alana," and it was like when on mute, I was like, "I can't function in front of you," but
that is so cool. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, it was an awesome experience. Hopefully next time I will tell myself that I could actually speak like a normal human being and say a little bit more. And then what is one piece of advice that you have for the people listening today?
One piece of advice would be to, and this goes for everyone, but especially my ladies out there, always, always, always ask for what it is that you want. And I mean that in a sense like advocating for yourself, you know, not like what we talked about, not getting in your own way and thinking, oh, I'm not going to get this or I don't deserve this. Like, don't do that. Don't negative talk. Just ask for it. Be clear, be concise. The clearer and more concise you are in asking for what you want, the easier it is for someone else to like absorb that and give it to you. You know, I learned this when I wanted to speak at a conference and I was trying to like subtly plant the seeds of being able to speak. And then the woman who was organizing just wasn't picking up on it. And I was getting frustrated. My mom said, just clearly ask. And when I did ask, she was like, oh my God, great idea. So like not making assumptions about how other people's brains work. Always, always, always ask for what you want.
I love that. Julia, thanks so much for coming on today. You are such an inspiration. Please follow Julia at Julia Landauer, but it's spelled Landaur, her last name. Also, watch her TEDx talks. They're so inspirational. I've really spent my Sunday night just watching Julia speak, and I just felt so inspired. But Julia, is there anywhere else people could follow you today and really just watch you on your journey?
Social media is great at Julia Landauer across the channels. Yeah, the TEDx talk, one of them is called Can Nice Girls Win Races? And the other one is Yes, I'm a Racecar Driver. Yes, I Get Scared. So two very different topics. But thank you so much for having me. This was a really fun discussion. You asked great, great questions. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Talk soon and can't wait to watch you win your next championship because I know it's going to be soon.
Thank you.
Bye.